Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Venus. Today I'm finally doing my favorite books of 2022. I'm just going to jump right into it. A few things of how I rank my books. I don't read manga, so there's no manga on, well, I don't read it yet, so there's no manga on this list. I don't really like short stories, so there's no short stories. There's no repeat authors. I did rank them from 10 to number 1. But I love them all and I recommend them all. I do also, if you're new to my channel, I read a variety of genres. So there's fantasy, horror, sci-fi, romance, and a thriller on this list. And I think that's it. I am going to start off with 2 nonfiction books that I absolutely loved reading last year. I only read 3 nonfiction books last year, but these 2 were definitely my favorite, so I absolutely wanted to mention them. They aren't part of the top 10, so I'm cheating a little bit. The first nonfiction book is Finding Me by Viola Davis. I absolutely love this book. It is a memoir. I listened to it on audio and she narrated it and it was fantastic. She is a well-known actress if you're not familiar with her, and she had a very, very tragic upbringing. This book is very transparent. She gets very vulnerable in it and she goes into very detailed accounts of her upbringing and the abuse that she went through. So be aware there are a lot of trigger warnings in this, and I just found it beautifully written. I love memoirs that kind of take you through their lives and the struggles that they have and then how they end up on the other side of this. I feel like memoirs like this give people hope that may have been raised the same way that she was, may have gone through the same things that she did. There are parts that I could personally relate to that I felt was very important for her to share, like I said, with other people that may have just really struggled with some of the things, some of the same things that she's gone through, and to see how far she's come through her journey and how successful she is. So I absolutely recommend this book if you're into memoirs, but be aware there are definitely trigger warnings. So the second book, I'll start off by saying that I personally listen to a lot of different kinds of music. My music taste is just as varied as the books that I read. So I absolutely knew that I wanted to read this book when I saw that he was putting out this book, because I was a huge fan of Nirvana, and that book is Storyteller by Dave Grohl, who was the drummer of Nirvana and currently the lead singer, founding member of the Foo Fighters. And this book was so good. I enjoyed it so much. There were funny moments. There were so many endearing moments because he's a girl dad and he loves his girls so much, and it was so nice to hear him talk about all of the things that he's trying to make sure they experience even though he's so busy with traveling. And it was just a great book. This was also an audiobook that I listened to. He narrates it, and it literally starts off from when he is a small child and sitting in jazz clubs with his mom, listening to bands and becoming obsessed with drums. And then you kind of go on through his journey, and he does touch on the death of Kurt Cobain, which was very, it was hard to read. I grew up in that time period. I was a huge fan of Nirvana, all of the grunge groups, Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots, all of them. So I could really picture what was going on in the time period that he was describing. Hearing him talk about those experiences and being very raw and open about it, again, was just a great read. It was a great read. He has this amazing humor. I mean, he tells a story about how he was arrested, I think it was in Australia or New Zealand, for drinking and driving like a moped or a scooter, and he got literally put in jail for that, and his telling of that was absolutely hilarious. He does do a lot of name dropping, I will say, but he's a musician. He's been exposed to so many other musicians that love him and have asked him to be a part of whatever performance that they're doing. So it was a lot, but I can understand it because he's famous and that's what happens. But I just wanted to make sure I mentioned those 2 nonfiction books. So if you're into memoirs, I highly recommend them, and I definitely recommend the audiobooks because they were fantastic. So now let's get into my top 10. The first book is going to be the only romance on this list, but it's Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. I love this author. I've pretty much liked all of the books that I've read by her so far. This one I think may be my favorite. This is about Alexis, who is a doctor. I think she works in an emergency room, and her two parents. She has 2 parents. Her parents are very well known in the medical field. They also kind of pretty much almost run this hospital that she works at, and they really want her to follow in her footsteps. She is currently trying to get out of an abusive relationship, and she ends up meeting a much younger, I believe there's a 10-year age gap, much younger. This guy lives in the country, like completely different lifestyle that she's used to, and of course things happen, and it's such a sweet, sweet story. I loved it so much. I loved the male character. He was so cute, and it just was like, you just get all the warm and fuzzies with this book. So I absolutely recommend this. I didn't read too many romance books last year, but this one definitely was my absolute favorite. Alexis has a best friend in this that is getting her own book. I actually have the arc. I can't remember what it's called, but I think it comes out in April. But her best friend in this book was hilarious. I mean, all these tabs are her best friend just saying like the most funniest one-liners. So you will also get lots of laughs out loud if you read this book, if you like your rom-coms to have a lot of humor in it. So I definitely recommend checking this out. Okay, so book number 9. I am going to be judged for this by some of you, and that's okay, because there's some lists that I've watched that I've seen books on that I would not like at all in my top 10. And that's the beauty of the booktube world. We all have differing opinions. So, having said that, my number 9 book of 2022 is House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. Yes, I know most people absolutely hated this book, but I really, really loved the plot twist. I was so happy he went there, and I loved it. I loved the whole book. I know, I'm weird, I'm sorry. So I'm not gonna go into too much detail about this, because if you don't know anything about it and you're interested in it, that is the best thing to do, because if you get spoiled, you're not gonna be able to accurately formulate your own opinion on it. This book is about a woman. She is an actress who is now a widow, and she is staying at her family lake house, and she is an alcoholic. And while she is at her family's lake house, a young couple move in across the lake from her, and she sees the woman in the water, appears to be drowning. She jumps in to save her, and they kind of form a little relationship, a quick, short relationship, and then she goes missing. So she is trying to figure out what happened to this woman. She's an unreliable narrator because she's drunk half the time, so you don't know if she's really saying what she says she's saying or doing the things that she says she's doing, so you just don't know. And Riley Sager takes it to a very weird place, and I loved it. I loved it. So I definitely recommend this if you haven't been spoiled yet. Definitely give it a try, especially if you do like Riley Sager books. I know a lot of people give him slack. I think everyone hated Survive the Night. Wasn't my favorite, but I just enjoy his books. I really do. So this is my number 9 book. Okay, my number 8 book is a sci-fi book, and that is Upgrade by Blake Crouch. I loved this book so much. It is about Logan, our main character, who has his genome, his DNA is hacked, and he becomes kind of like this superhuman. He can read much faster, he's stronger, he can literally almost like predict what you're gonna say before you say it out of your mouth. He realizes there is a plan to change the course of humanity, and he is the one person that can stop it, and it has to do with changing your genome, the environment, and part of it is wrapped up in his family history. And I thought this book was so good. It is fast-paced. There are fight scenes in it that reminded me of Jason Bourne movies, and I loved it so much. The writing is good. I know a lot of people that have read a lot of Blake Crouch didn't find this to be their favorite, but this is my second Blake Crouch book, and I loved it more than Dark Matter. They're both amazing, but this one I chose to be on my top 8. So it's a very quick read. Like I said, the pacing is fantastic. Action is great, and the way that he incorporates science jargon with DNA and everything I thought was done very well. I didn't think that it was too much or too long-winded. It's pretty easy to understand, and I love sci-fi books like this, so absolutely can't wait to read more of Blake Crouch. Book number 7 is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. You know I had to put it on my list. Love this book. Talked about it so many times on my channel. I feel like it's on a lot of people's lists as well. And I just loved it. It's a little cute, cozy fantasy book. So this book is about Viv. She is an ogre, and she's decided she wants to get out of the game of fighting and stealing and all the things. She just wants to take this magical relic that she's found on her last job and go to a cozy town and open up a coffee shop. And no one knows what coffee is in this town, but she's determined to make it a thing. And the way that it's done and all the little characters that she gathers with her to help make this happen is so so cute. I loved it. I loved the progression of her menu in her cafe. I love the descriptions of the things in the menu. There is like a small conflict in it that they have to get through, and overall I just found this book so comforting, and I can't wait to reread it. And I think I heard that he's coming out with a second book to this, so I can't wait to continue on in this world that he's developing, because it's just so cute. So book number 6 is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. I love this book. I know a lot of people don't like this. It's a standalone in the first law world, if you're not familiar, and a lot of people didn't like this one. I actually really enjoyed this one. I am gonna say there's a part of it where it kind of dropped off a little bit. It got really political and took away from all the excitement that started the book, but outside of that, I still think about this book. I still think about the characters. I still think about the humor in it. Oh my gosh, all these tabs are just like lines from characters in it that just had me laughing out loud. I just love the assassin revenge story that this book unravels. It was just such a fun read. So this is about Manza Mercado. Hopefully I'm saying her name right. She's a mercenary, and some things happen that in the very beginning, I mean, it jumps right off. You're jumped right into action, and she is on a revenge mission. And she is determined to assassinate every single person that was involved in this tragedy that happened in her life. And it just is nonstop until it gets to a certain point at the end, unfortunately. But I loved it. Joe Abercrombie, he's so good at making you love these dark characters, and the way he interweaves humor in it. I love the humor that's in it. I love so far all of the books that he's written and how he's put in humor in it. So I don't know. I love this book. I know, like I said, it's not everyone's favorite out of the standalones. I actually did read The Heroes recently. I'll talk about that in my January wrap up. And that one wasn't my favorite. Still a good book, but not my favorite. But we'll get into that another time. Yeah, so I am absolutely loving Joe Abercrombie's books. They are so good, and he is definitely like one of my favorite fantasy books authors right now. So I can't wait to keep on reading through this world, but I had to put this on my list because I still think about it. I loved it. I enjoyed it. It was so fun, and absolutely recommend it once you get through First Law Trilogy. All right, we are entering in the top 5 books of 2022 for me, and number 5 is The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is book 2 in the Bloodsworn, I don't know if it's going to be a trilogy, but Bloodsworn series, and I actually love both of these books. They both could be on this list, but I just wanted to choose one. This is the second one. I am really enjoying John Gwynne's writing style so much. I love the multiple POVs and the world, especially in this one, the world that he's building, this Norse-inspired environment and mythology, and it's just so much fun. The pacing was great. The characters were great. The family, like the found family and the loyalty and the pursuit for power, just all of these things that happened in this book were so good. The way it ended, whew, I can't wait till he gets around to writing the 3rd book. But yeah, John Gwynne is also becoming a very top tier fantasy author for me. Book number 4, you know I had to put a Robin Hobb book on here, and that is, which one is this? Royal Assassins, the second book in the Farseer trilogy. I loved the whole trilogy so much. I did finish it last year, but book number 2 is definitely my favorite. There was just a lot of action in it towards the end, and Fitz goes through so much in the second book that I just had such a great time reading this book. So Farseer trilogy is about Fitz, who is dropped off on basically the front door of the king's house. He is a bastard of one of his sons, and he is taken in and raised as a royal assassin. Now, when I say the word assassin, that doesn't mean he's in here like sword playing and not chopping off heads and going out and doing all this like exciting stuff. He is like a low-key assassin, but he's really good at what he does, and the group of characters that are developed in this book and Fitz himself is just so good. Robin Hobb, phenomenal writer, absolutely phenomenal writer. The prose has been mentioned so many times by other people, but I 100% agree. The dialogue in it, the pacing, the characters, the character development, the character arcs, all the things. She does so well, and even with the third book that I didn't love as much, it was still a wonderful ending to this trilogy. I am so excited to get into the Live Ship Traders trilogy soon at some point this year, and yeah, she's just such an amazing writer, and I'm so glad that I finally stopped being intimidated and picked up a Robin Hobb book last year, because I am hooked. Book number 3 is 11/22/63 by Stephen King. This book is chunky, but it is a very good book. I enjoyed this so much. I actually started reading this because I joined the Tome Topple Readathon that happened at some point last year. And one of the prompts was to choose a standalone tome, and this was the one that I chose because it had been sitting on my shelves for so long and I didn't want to pick it up because it was so long. And I'm so glad that I finally did, because it was amazing. So this book is about Jake, who is an English teacher, and he lives in this small town, and he goes to his local diner all the time. He's friends with the owner, Al, and Al comes out of the back of the diner one day and has aged significantly. Looks very, very sick, almost like basically like it happened overnight within hours. And he brings Jake back into the back and shows him a pantry that is actually a portal to a portal that takes him to 1958, and Al has asked him to continue his mission to stop the assassination of JFK, because he thinks that if JFK was never assassinated, the world would be a better place. So I love, in the beginning of this, Jake decides to kind of do like a trial run with one of the students from one of his classes that had something traumatic happen in their life, and he wants to go back to try to change that, and he does this trial run, and he decides to go ahead and also try to stop the assassination of JFK. It is not very heavy on history, because that was what I was afraid of too. I'm not really a big history buff. It's not really heavy on history. There are, obviously parts of it that talk about JFK and what happened, but it's really about the characters that he encounters in this town, because he goes back in 1958, so he's there for 5 years, and he's building these relationships with these people as he's also plotting to try to stop the assassination of JFK, and it's just so well done. I feel like the length of it didn't bother me at all. I really enjoyed the pacing in this as well, and the characters, I love them so much. The ending had me crying, and I am definitely going to reread this at one point. It is such a great book, and so different than what I've read of Stephen King, and probably at this point I think maybe one of my favorite Stephen King books so far. So I highly recommend this if you haven't tried any of Stephen King's book. I think this is a great place to it's long though, probably not a great place to start unless you like long books, but it's very different from his other books, so I loved it. We are up to the top 2. This book I actually completely forgot that I read last year until I was looking at my list of books. It was like one of the first books that I read in 2022, and because initially 11/22/63 was going to be my number 2 book. Book number 2 is Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. This was a perfect ending to a trilogy. If you're not familiar, this trilogy is an Asian-inspired mafia fantasy, and it is centered around jade, which is like this magical gem that the mafia families are kind of warring over. They want possession over it. So you kind of spanned over through these 3 books this main family who is fighting to gain full control over jade, and you follow them and their children. And in this last book, you follow this family over decades and how they try to gain full control over jade in this expanding world that's built, and the warring family, and it just had all the mafia vibes. It was so good. The characters, there are characters in the first book that I didn't like at all that end up being my favorite characters in the third book, and the way that Fonda Lee writes these characters and the journeys that they go through and the family loyalty and the warring families and how Jade is trying to expand into other parts of this world and what it can be used for. It's just so well written, and I will definitely reread this trilogy at some point. If you've read the first book and you're struggling with it and don't feel like it's something for you, I challenge you to read the second book and keep going, because that's when it really hooked me, is in the second book. And the third book, if you can get through the second book, third book is going to be phenomenal for you. So definitely give it a try. My number one book of 2022 is Swan Song by Robert McCammon. I cannot stop thinking about this book, and that's saying a lot because it's over 900 pages, but I love every single page in this book. The author did such a fantastic job of making you root for these characters, hate some of these characters, try to figure out what's going on. Is there supernatural elements behind what's happening in this story? Let me back up. It is a post-apocalyptic book, and the United States has kind of been thrown into this has been thrown into this nuclear war. So there is just devastation across the country, and there are people that are trying to survive through this. And there's a group of characters that are followed in their pursuit to try to figure out this somewhat supernatural element, and there's a main character in it that may have some kind of power to overcome what's happened in this world. And when they all merge together, it is so good and so worth the payoff of getting through and getting to know these characters through their journey. There are a group of characters that are trying to survive and just live peacefully and get through what they've been through. There's a group of characters that want to, as always, have complete power over everyone and take ownership of the new world that's trying to be established. And then there's these group of people that know that there's something more to what happened. And it is just such a well-written book. I cannot wait to read more of Robert McCammon's I am so happy that I came across this book on fellow booktubers that have reviewed it, because it's my favorite book of 2022, and I absolutely cannot wait to read it again and really dig into more of these characters and their journeys. It can be very gruesome, so it went there for a couple parts of this book, so it's definitely, I think it's actually classified as horror post-apocalyptic, I can never say that word, horror post-apocalyptic, and like I said, there are parts of it that I could not eat while I was reading it, so if you're into that, that's definitely something that I would recommend. So those are my top 10 books of 2022. I feel like this list looks totally different than my list from last year because I've read so much more fantasy that I have just absolutely embraced as my new favorite genre. And 2023 has already started off fantastic because I've read some really good books so far this year too. So that's it for me. Thank you guys as always for hanging out with me. Please let me know below what were your favorite books of 2022. Have you read any of these books? You can go ahead and give me the blues about House Across the Lake, because I'm sure a lot of you were rolling your eyes at that one, but that's okay. I still loved it. Are some of these also other books that I read that you didn't like at all? That's cool too. So I'd love to hear from you. If you are new, please hit that like and subscribe button. As always, I appreciate the time that you spend with me, and I will see you guys again soon. See ya.